This is the time to stand up now. We can't carry on like this. This is the time to stand up now. We can't carry on like this.
Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them. On the 20th of November 2003, James Ignatius O'Rourke McMahon was elected councillor for the Failsworth East Ward of Oldham. Deeply ambitious, he ruthlessly rose to power, and by 2011, he was already leader of the council. In 2015, exploiting a Labour Party loophole, he became MP for Oldham West and Royton. If only the people of the town knew then what they now know. Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them.
Very, very good evening. Thursday the 16th of January 2025. Wow, what a day. Thank you for those of you who've joined me. This was an impromptu transmission. I do. My daughter's fast asleep in the room, and I had to wait for her to finish having the tea, tell me all about her day, and then get her to bed. So that's why we're slightly later than we normally would be, although normally I would not be with you on a Thursday evening. My name is Raja MIAH. I've been at this now for 6 years, and those of you who are joining us new in this journey, I think you should take pause and appreciate how a small team of people from a small northern mill town have led this campaign and got this to where it currently is. They call us toxic, they called us far right and racist, they called us misogynist, they called us everything they could possibly call us. And that is because, unlike other reactions to the grooming gangs in other towns, what we did in Oldham was we mobilised a political campaign. And it is this political campaign you are all now witnessing the fruits of. Of course, none of this would have been possible. None of this would have been possible without brave individuals who took what we were saying and amplified it, spun it their own way. Doesn't matter. There are people out there who need to be recognised for what's gone on. Of course, the survivors for speaking out, particularly those survivors who've took to social media or given interviews on TV channels. Immense bravery, absolutely immense bravery, and they should be first recognised to have what was done to them, and for them to find strength, not just for justice for themselves, but to speak out for the thousands more, the tens of thousands more, who carry it with them and try and forget about it, compartmentalised it and left it to one side and hoped it was all a nasty nightmare. I understand that, I appreciate that, and I think first and foremost, those of the survivors who have campaigned should be, well, if I had my way, they would all receive automatic compensation from a scheme that the government would be forced to set up, which they haven't, of course. The next group have got to be the likes of campaigners such as Maggie Oliver, who have been relentlessly advocating on behalf of those young women whose lives were ruined. And what that woman does and how she continues to be the face of this campaign and demonstrate the compassion and see the good in people and still try and support people to be the best they can be, I think needs to be acknowledged. And then of course you've got so many of the GB News guys now. They might not talk to me, it's completely fine. I don't believe for 1 minute that the decision not to talk to me and not to be interview me comes from the likes of Charlie Peters or any of those at an operational level. I've been around in big organisations long enough to know there are There are layers and layers and layers. But I think, you know, his commitment to the cause has got to be recognised. And the others, and they've kept it in the public domain, and they've done really, really well. But for me, this story would never have got the momentum it has if it wasn't for the power of social media. I'm currently sharing what I share with you on YouTube. If I have the time and the energy, I'll snippet some of it and put it on X later tonight or maybe tomorrow. But the space Elon Musk has created and what he's done, I don't think can be underestimated. And then you have the likes of MIAH, and today he released it earlier, Andrew Gold on his Heretics program. If you've not seen me on Heretics, go and have a look and decide for yourself. You know, so many people say, oh, you're lying, you're doing this, you're doing that, and you're manipulating people. I say, well, you know what? I don't take anyone to be a fool. Watch it yourself. Have a look around you yourself. And then decide for yourself. Decide for yourself. Who is telling the truth? Is it me? Or is it Yvette Cooper? Who is telling the truth? Is it the BBC? Or is it GB News? Who is telling the truth? You decide completely. My internet might go. It's been flaky all day. So if it goes, do stay where you are, and it will reconnect once it's been reset. So don't worry about that. Right. I request all of you to, at the very least, like these videos. And if you can't like them, share, subscribe. I mean, I don't know what else I can say or what else I can do. If you're thousands, tens of thousands are now watching this content, and I get very little return. Forget the money. I get next to nothing in return in terms of the money. But at the very least, like and subscribe to the channel. I think it's the least any of you could do. My work is 100% community funded. Without you, I am not able to continue. I think I put I know I put a transmission out last night. Thousands viewed it. I think something like 8 people bought me a coffee in various forms or another. You decide. You're here because you find value in what I do. And you're here because I analyze things and I present information in a way you will not get anywhere else. So you see this idiot? I don't tolerate idiots like this. Go away. I've just banned him. I'm not interested. I'm not interested in that sort of nonsense. And I bet you, I bet my last penny it'll be a Pakistani. I bet my last penny will be a Pakistani. Thank you. I think it has. And I think that's one of the reasons why they are completely trying to erase me and what I share from any of the news channels. Now, there's that email. You've all seen that email. Kevin Fitzpatrick from the BBC conversing with Jim McMahon whilst leader of the council to colluding to cover up Pakistani rape gangs now proven to have existed in the report, operating out of shisha bars in my town. Not one of the mainstream news platforms, including GB News sadly, will even share that. Forget taking my testimony, not one of them will share that. let me bring you up to speed with what's happened. I'm sorry, Dennis. I'm not having someone talk like that. Describe decent people that way. I find it staggering. I find it staggering that these people still believe that racism is a one-way exchange. It's white people who are racist towards them. They are always the victims. Staggering. This is the news page. The BBC news page. Cooper announcing urgent grooming gang review is buried at the bottom already. Do you see? Here. We're going to play it. We're going to listen to her. And I'm going to tell you what brought her to this point and what we do next. I presume that's why you're all here.
The most important task should be to increase police investigations into these horrific crimes and get abusers behind bars. We will introduce stronger sentences for child grooming, making it an aggravating factor to organise abuse and exploitation. And I can announce new action today to help victims get more investigations and prosecutions underway. I'm extending the remit of the Independent Child Sexual Abuse Review Panel, so it covers not just historic cases before 2013, but all cases since, so that any victim of abuse will have the right to seek an independent review without having to go back to the local institutions who decided not to proceed with their case. I'm writing today to the National Police Chiefs Council to ask all Chief Constables to look again at historic gang exploitation cases where no further action was taken, and to work with the Police Child Sexual Exploitation Task Force to pursue new lines of inquiry and reopen investigations where appropriate. And these new measures will be backed by £2 million additional funding for the task force and the panel.
Okay, so that's the snippet the BBC played. And I played that on purpose because the majority of people go to web pages like that. Still, sadly, it's the mainstream media. We can call it the legacy media. We can call it the establishment media, but it is where most people still get the news from in a country such as ours. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has announced plans for a nationwide review of grooming gang evidence and 5 government-backed local inquiries. She stopped short of launching a statutory national inquiry, as called for by the Conservatives and some Labour MPs, but this marks a clear shift in the government's position. Cooper said top lawyer Tom Crowther, who led an inquiry in Telford, would help Oldham and 4 other pilot areas yet to be named develop their own reviews. She also announced a rapid 3-month national audit headed by veteran government troubleshooter Baroness Louise Casey to examine the demographics of the gangs and the victims, as well as cultural drivers behind the offending. Conservative Shadow Home Secretary Chris Phillip said the plan was wholly inadequate and repeated his call for a full national inquiry. He expressed concern that the local inquiries would not have the powers to compel witnesses to attend and give evidence under oath. The issue had recently been thrust into the spotlight by tech billionaire Elon Musk, who had criticised the Prime Minister for not calling a national inquiry. Mr. Musk responded to Cooper's announcement by saying on his X platform, "I hope this is a proper investigation." He added, "This is a step in the right direction, but the results will speak for themselves." The row between Mr. Musk and Starmer centred on high-profile cases where groups of men, mainly Pakistani descent, were convicted of sexually abusing and raping predominantly young white girls in towns such as Rotherham and Rochdale. An independent report published by Professor Alexis J in 2014 estimated 1,400 girls had been abused in Rotherham. She would later go on to lead a national review into child sex abuse, which lasted 7 years and made 20 recommendations when it was published in 2022. And that, of course, we now know that national review had nothing to do with the Pakistani rape gangs. They avoided investigating the rape gangs. In recent 3 days, 3 Labour MPs publicly expressed support for a national inquiry: Dan Carden, Rotherham MP Sarah Champion and Rochdale MP Paul Waugh. Other senior Labour figures, including Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham, also joined the calls, saying they would support a limited new inquiry. Professor J rejected calls for a new national inquiry last week, saying victims want to see action on her recommendations and a new inquiry would cause delays. As if a government cannot do 2 things at once. As if a government cannot do 2 things at once. The Prime Minister and Labour ministers had said their priority was to implement the J recommendations, and Cooper announced that one of the key points, mandatory reporting, would be added to the Crime and Policing Bill. Mandatory reporting. It is already mandatory reporting to report the gang rape of children. Public officials already have to do that. You don't need an explicit law saying they need to do that. In a statement in the House of Commons, Cooper said that despite Professor J's report and other inquiries, shamefully little progress had been done. This has got to change, he said, and added that by Easter the government would set out a clear timetable for implementing the J report's recommendations. Cooper argued that effective local inquiries can delve into far more local detail and deliver more locally relevant answers and change than a lengthy nationwide inquiry can provide. She said Tom Crowther, who led an inquiry in Telford, would help the government develop a new framework for victim-centred locally led inquiries where they are needed. She said this would begin by working with Oldham Council and up to 4 other pilot areas, with £5 million of an overall £10 million package being put up to get work off the ground. Champion pressed the Home Secretary on whether the inquirers would be able to summon witnesses to give evidence. What we need to do is make sure there have been no cover-ups, and it's only if it's on a statutory footing that we can do that, she said. Cooper replied that different approaches could be taken and the government would work with local mayors like Andy Burnham, the cover-up king, and local councils like the Pakistani gangster-endorsed Aroj Shah's, one that is in Oldham, to make sure that we can strengthen the accountability arrangements. She said this included introducing a duty of candour, so they have a duty to tell the truth, which requires public servants to tell the truth. We now need a law that requires public servants to tell the truth. The separate audit looking at the ethnicity of grooming gangs and the victims will be led by Baroness Casey, who previously led the 2015 review of Rotherham Council. The crossbench peer had already been appointed to lead a commission into social care, but Downing Street insisted the 2 pieces of work would not clash, saying her work on grooming gangs would be finished by the start of April. That's 3 months. In a statement, Cooper also announced she would be asking chief constables in England and Wales to re-examine historical gang exploitation cases and reopen investigations where appropriate. This would be backed by £2.5 million of funding, she said. More victims of child sex abuse and exploitation will be able to seek an independent review of the cases, the government have said. On the same day Cooper was delivering her statement, BBC News spent time with 4 survivors. I'll get stuffed. Listening to Cooper's statement, Sarah and Amelia exchanged a hug. You have no idea, do you, Sarah and Amelia, that you are now being groomed by the government. We've been fighting for this, they said through tears. No, you haven't. I feel like the weight of the world has been lifted off my shoulders. I'm satisfied for now. But survivors Sam and Jane were not satisfied, and they said they did not feel they had been listened to. We wanted a government inquiry into Oldham and into other towns, Sam told the BBC. We know what is right and what is wrong. We know that a government-led inquiry differs from a council-led inquiry. Okay. Enough of the BBC for now. You want my opinion? Yvette Cooper is continuing to cover up for the Pakistani rape gangs. It's as simple as that. First of all, she's commissioned local reviews, or she's agreed to 5 local reviews, of which Oldham is one of them. The reason Oldham is one of them is because of what we've done, and it's a national spotlight. She's brought in the judge from Telford and tried to say, oh, but they can get to the truth this way and they can get to the truth that way. No. The only way to get to the truth is through statutory powers, which a public inquiry would have and which they could have given to this. It would not have delayed anything at all. So you can have a national inquiry, as Sarah Champion actually advocated. I don't agree with what she's done, but on that she's right. She advocated a national inquiry with hubs off it, with spokes off it to different towns. And those reviews take place independently, and it's all fed back into a central hub. And all the evidence is collated, and the government reacts and responds centrally. She hasn't done that. What she's done, he said, 5 towns or cities can have them. Oldham's one of them. I'll let you know who the other 4 are afterwards. We're bringing in the judge from Telford, who himself said he had been held back because he did not have the powers in Telford to compel witnesses. And now what he's supposed to do is set up these inquiries in partnership with a bent mayor who's neck deep in the cover-up of the gang rape of children in Oldham, with a corrupt council led by a Pakistani gangster-endorsed council leader who hangs off the arm of a convicted heroin dealer, in an environment where every Labour Party council leader in that town, who we have ousted at the ballot box, has been taken care of by the Labour Party for playing a role in facilitating the cover-up. And we are supposed to give each other exchange a hug. We've been waiting, we've been fighting for this for years now. What they are doing, when they are now engaging with survivors, is they are grooming them in a similar manner to how the Pakistani rape gangs groomed them. These are young women who are broken as a consequence of what's took place to them, desperately craving, maybe craving's too harsh, but desperate for someone to hear them. And the government are sending ministers up to them to sit with them and smile, nod, give them tea and biscuits, make them feel important, and manipulate them. And please tell me if I'm being too harsh. Please tell me if I'm being too harsh. The government are now grooming the survivors. The Oldham inquiry that Yvette Cooper's announced has no powers to compel witnesses, has no powers to go after the evidence, and is now nothing more than a rehash of Andy Burnham's inquiry, apart from playing a game, a fake consultation game of engaging survivors. It is absolute nonsense. It is complete and absolute nonsense. And then meanwhile, she sent off Baroness Casey, who's recently done something very dodgy in Manchester, I think. If you look at what she's done with Andy Burnham's stuff to do with, I think it was young women being sexually assaulted in police stations. This is an establishment stitch-up. This is an establishment stitch-up. Thank you. Let me see if I've got this video loaded up yet. I was trying to load this video up. Yes, it's loaded. So I'm going to play the full speech. I'm not going to play all of it, but there's a certain bit I want to get to that I want you to hear, because I know you will pick up on it now. I know you will pick up on it now. I recorded the full speech and I want to play it. Please bear with me, it's important. If you are new to me, please like, please subscribe to this YouTube channel. There's only a few thousand of us on this channel, despite our viewing numbers. And please, I am 100% community funded. To those of you who are watching for free and have not supported me, I don't know what to say. I really don't know what to say.
Before we come to the statement, I would like to remind the House that on issues which may relate to ongoing cases relating to vulnerable children, members will wish to take care to avoid saying anything that could prejudice any cases that are currently before the courts or which might come before the courts at a later date. Statement, Home Secretary Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last Monday, I set out the actions this government is taking forward to tackle the terrible crimes of child sexual exploitation and abuse, including mandatory reporting, a new victims and survivors panel, an overhaul of data and police performance requirements, tougher sentences for perpetrators, and support for local inquiries, including in Oldham. The Safeguarding Minister is this morning meeting with survivors from Oldham, and earlier this week she and I met Professor Alexis Jay, who chaired both the 7-year National Independent Inquiry into child sexual abuse and the first local independent inquiry into grooming gangs in Rotherham. Professor Jay's strongest message to us was that the survivors who bravely testified to terrible crimes committed against them must not be left to feel that their efforts were in vain, because despite all the inquiries, no one listened and nothing was done. So following those discussions, I therefore want to update the House on our next steps, both to take forward inquiry recommendations and to go further in tackling sexual exploitation and grooming on the streets and online to keep children safe. The Independent National Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse completed its final report in 2022. It took 7 years, heard 7,000 personal testimonies and considered 2 million pages of evidence. They were devastating accounts of brutal rapes, sexual violence, humiliation, trauma, betrayal of vulnerable children by those charged with protecting them, and people in positions of power who shamefully put the reputation of institutions before the protection of children. The inquiry included separate detailed reports on organised child abuse in residential homes and schools, abuse and cover-ups in the Catholic and Anglican churches, and a 2-year inquiry published in February 2022 into child sexual exploitation by organised networks and grooming gangs, which itself examined over 400 recommendations made by previous inquiries and serious case reviews, as well as taking further evidence of its own. And there have been further reports since then, including on Telford and on police performance. But despite all those national inquiries, reports, and hundreds of recommendations, far too little action has been taken. And shamefully little progress has been made. That has to change. So before Easter, the government will lay out a clear timetable for taking forward the 20 recommendations from the final ICSA inquiry report. 4 of those are specifically for the Home Office, and I can confirm we have accepted them in full, including on disclosure and barring, and work on these is already underway. A cross-government ministerial group is considering and working through remaining recommendations, and that group will be supported by our new Victims and Survivors panel. In addition, I can confirm today that the government will implement all the remaining recommendations in the Child Abuse Inquiry's separate standalone report on grooming gangs from February 22, including updating key department education guidance. So let me turn to the areas where we need to go further. As I said last week, the most important task should be to increase police investigations into these horrific crimes and get abusers behind bars. Produce stronger sentences for child grooming, making it an aggravating factor to organise abuse and exploitation. And I can announce new action today to help victims get more investigations and prosecutions underway. I'm extending the remit of the Independent Child Sexual Abuse Review Panel, so it covers not just historic cases before 2013, but all cases since, so that any victim of abuse will have the right to seek an independent review without having to go back to the local institutions who decided not to proceed with their case. I'm writing today to the National Police Chiefs Council to ask all Chief Constables to look again at historic gang exploitation cases where no further action was taken, and to work with the Police Child Sexual Exploitation Task Force to pursue new lines of inquiry and reopen investigations where appropriate. And these new measures will be backed by £2 million additional funding for the task force and the panel. And all police forces will be expected to implement the 2023 recommendations from His Majesty's Inspectorate, including producing problem profiles on the nature of grooming gangs in their area, and I have asked the Inspectorate to review progress this year. But as well as reviewing past cases, we also need much stronger action to uncover the full scale and nature of these awful crimes. The Child Sexual Exploitation Police Task Force, led by the National Police Chiefs Council, has estimated that out of the 115,000 child sexual abuse offences recorded by the police in 2023, around 4,000 involved more than one perpetrator. Of those, they identify around 1,100 that involved abuse within the family, over 300 involving abuse in institutions, and they identified 717 reported cases of group or gang-related child sexual exploitation. But we know the vast majority of abuse goes unreported, so we expect all of those figures to be a significant underestimate. The task force reports there are currently 127 major police investigations underway on child sexual exploitation and gang grooming across 29 different police forces. Many major investigations have involved Pakistani heritage gangs, and the police task force evidence also shows exploitation and abuse taking place across many different communities and ethnicities. But the data on ethnicity of both perpetrators and victims is still inadequate.
She is misleading everybody. Did you see how she said many Pakistani heritage, many are from other communities? Do you see how they continue to hide the numbers? Do you see how the government continues to hide the numbers of the Pakistani rape gangs? 717 gang-related CSE cases. Well, what does that mean? 717 gangs or 717 survivors? Evasive. She is here because she's forced to be here. She's desperately trying to protect Labour Party politicians. Where is the Deputy Prime Minister? Where is she? Where is Angela Rayner? Why is Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, not sat there? We know Starmer's in Kiev. handing out billions. Where is Angela Rayner? Oh, I know her. She's been directly incriminated in the cover-up of the grooming and gang rape of children. Where is Jim McMahon? Oh, I know. He's not there. He's directly incriminated. Debbie Abrahams is hiding in the back. And I've released the evidence on Debbie Abrahams. She attempted to frame me and have me maliciously prosecuted because I dared to challenge her on her record on speaking out against the grooming and gang rape of little white girls in her constituency of Oldham, East and Saddleworth, particularly in comparison to how she's always ranting on about Kashmir and Gaza. So much so, we nicknamed her Debbie Kashmir. So she won't tell us the numbers. She won't tell us the numbers.
As I said last week, we will overhaul the data we expect local areas to collect as part of a new performance management framework. But I've also asked the Child Sexual Exploitation Task Force to immediately expand the ethnicity data it collects and publishes, gathering data from the end of the investigation when a fuller picture is available, not just from the beginning when suspects may not yet have been identified. But in order to go much further, I have asked Baroness Louise Casey to oversee a rapid audit of the current scale and nature of gang-based exploitation across the country and to make recommendations on the further work that is needed. The specific 2022 ICSA report, Child Sexual Independent Inquiry report on gang exploitation, concluded that an accurate picture of the prevalence of child sexual exploitation could not be gleaned from the data and evidence it had available. So this audit will seek to fill that gap. It will look at further evidence that was not previously available, including that collected by the Police Task Force and including the new problem profiles compiled by police forces, and it will include an equivalent audit of child protection referrals. It will properly examine ethnicity data and the demographics of the gangs involved and their victims, and will look at the cultural and societal drivers for this type of offending, including amongst different ethnic groups. And it will make recommendations about further analysis, investigations and actions that are needed to address current and historic failures.
Baroness Casey is meant to do all of that in 3 months. Baroness Casey is an establishment figure. There is no way she has the insight into these communities and into these issues to be able to do any of that. This is just a cover-up. What they're hoping to do is that the 3 month she'll do this, the report will come back and say, oh, look, it's all over the place. These people do it here, those people do it there, some other people do it somewhere else. What we've been maintaining all along is we do not doubt that child abuse takes place across a range of communities. We do not doubt that for 1 minute. We know there are white grooming gangs. We know that there are paedophiles in the church. We know all of that. What we are saying is this. 1, the Pakistani rape gangs are real. They operate across the country and have done so for decades. They called us far right and racist. To this day, not a single government minister has stood up and said the Pakistani rape gangs are real and it was wrong to call people far right and racist. We also know that the Pakistani rape gangs target white girls, specifically working class white girls. And we know from the testimony of the survivors and the little of the court records that have been released, because the government still refuses to release the court transcripts of these cases. But from what there is in the public domain, we know that the perpetrators were very clear. White trash, white sluts, deserved what they got, prostitutes. We know that these Pakistani men held these white girls in complete contempt. Fudge is all of that. We know there is an increasing religious element, if not to the crimes themselves, but the undercurrent of a growing division in our society between younger Muslims and the rest of us. We know that. We can see that in the way Gaza is playing out. Thank you so much. And thank you, David. Thank you. We know all of that. Baroness Casey won't pick up on any of that, because she is there to do the establishment's job. And the data they will come back with will not in any way look to addressing this issue. It will look to diluting this issue. And the context of all of this time last week, she was saying, Yvette Cooper was saying it's all okay. A week later, she's announcing dozens and dozens of interventions. No. They should invite an investigation team from the United Nations, is what they should do. They should call in the United Nations. Carry on.
Baroness Louise Casey was the author of the No Holds Barred 2015 report into child sexual exploitation in Rotherham, and I have therefore asked her to oversee this rapid 3-month audit ahead of the launch of the Independent Commission into Adult Social Care. In many areas across the country, the focus must now be on further police investigations and implementing recommendations to improve services. But we will also provide stronger national backing for local inquiries where they are needed to get truth and justice for victims and survivors. The Prime Minister and I both met last week with survivors from Telford, who had enormous praise for the way that local inquiry was conducted after there had been failings over very many years.
The Telford inquiry failed to lead to the prosecution of a single public official or politician. In fact, the chief executive of Telford at the time is now its MP. The reason why survivors that they spoke to speak highly is because some of these survivors have been groomed. You see them. Who will get called to a meeting? I might have a TV interview. They're made to feel special, which is exactly what the Pakistani rape gangs did. You have the government grooming children in the same way the rape gangs groom children. And now the government is using their testimony in this way, in this manipulative way, to protect and prevent a genuine public inquiry into the cover-up of the gang rape of children.
And that inquiry led to tangible change, including piloting the introduction of CCTV in taxis, appointing child sexual exploitation.
She has just said that the Telford inquiry led to tangible change including putting CCTV in taxis. It's the first outcome that is claiming of the Telford review. The first big win. That's right, the Home Secretary's first big win is to claim that they got CCTV in taxis. And they've all got a straight face. We dealt with the grooming gangs in Telford after the inquiry by putting in CCTV in taxis.
Experts in local secondary schools. And as we've seen, effective local inquiries can delve into far more local detail.
Okay, so the two examples she used to demonstrate the Telford inquiry was successful was CCTV footage in taxis and putting in staff in secondary schools, pastoral staff in secondary schools. What on earth? What am I missing with you people? How many times do I have to tell you? Just ignore people. What am I missing? Is that one? Okay, I've got rid of him, right? What's wrong with you? There's real stuff going on here. If some idiot wants to write something, let them write something. What's wrong with you people? No wonder you get played all the time.
And deliver more locally relevant answers and change than a lengthy nationwide inquiry can provide. So Tom Crown...
A lengthy nationwide. So she's claiming these local inquiries. The main reason is because the nationwide inquiry would be too long. These people have been fighting for justice, or we in our town have been fighting for justice for 6 years. 6 years to get it this far. 6 years to force it this far.
KC, chair of the Telford inquiry, has agreed to work with the government to develop a new framework for victim-centred, locally led inquiries where they are needed, and as a first step, to work with Oldham Council and up to 4 other pilot areas.
So there you have it. The local review investigation is working with Oldham Council. That is the council where the leader hangs off the arm of a convicted Pakistani heroin dealer, where the council has multiple direct links with convicted gangsters from the Pakistani community, where the council has councillors sat in the council chamber that were friends of Shabir Ahmed, Daddy, and a council whose council officers have attempted to imprison me and destroy the lives of people in the town who spoke out against the cover-up of the gang rape of children. And that council is going to be facilitating the local inquiry.
That will also include support for local authorities who want to explore other ways to support victims, including local panels or drawing on the experience of the...
other ways? What other way is there to support survivors other than to take their testimony, to arrest and convict those responsible, and also to arrest and convict those involved in failing them and those responsible for the cover-up? Why is it any more complicated than that? It shouldn't be, should it?
Independent Inquiry Truth Project. And Madam Deputy Speaker, the government is already drawing up a duty of care long-awaited Hillsborough law. So we will also work with mayors and local councils to now bolster the accountability mechanisms that can support and follow up local inquiries to ensure that those who are complicit in cover-ups or to try to resist scrutiny are always robustly held to account and truth and justice are never denied. This new package of national support for local inquiries will be backed by £5 million of additional funding to get further local work off the ground.
So they're giving £5 million to 5 local authorities. That's for what needs to happen. That's impossible. And then, of course, there is the comparison. Last year, about this time last year, the Conservative government was then the amount was then increased by the Labour government after the Southport incident. But this time last year, the Conservative government gave £130 million to protect mosques. I think Starmer came along and announced another 30 million on top of that. This is outrageous. This is outrageous behaviour. And what's fundamentally flawed in her argument is that she says it's about increasing police investigations. It isn't. Because as yesterday, those of you who joined me yesterday, you'll have seen, we drew out that Operation Sherwood in Oldham had only arrested 1 person in 2 years, and it's a 100-strong police team. It's because the survivors have lost all faith and all trust in the council and in the police. And if you want to rebuild trust in the council and in the police, there's another way of doing this. You go and arrest those who failed them. You convict those who failed them. Because we know there's public documents available without the testimony of survivors that will clearly demonstrate and identify the public officials that were involved in failing them and the politicians that were involved in covering them up, such as Angela Rayner, Deputy Prime Minister, Jim McMahon, Secretary of State, Andy Burnham, Greater Manchester Mayor, and Debbie Abrams, Chair of a government committee. They should be arrested. Is that how much we gave to Pakistan recently? Wow. And now she stood there, and we know that £1 million will get swallowed up in paying their own people. We know it.
Because at every level, getting justice for victims and protecting children is a responsibility we all share. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, we cannot ignore the way in which child exploitation is changing as offenders exploit new technology to target and groom children, and we should all be deeply worried about the pace and growth of exploitation that begins online. We're therefore bolstering the work of the Home Office-funded undercover online network of police officers to target online offenders and developing cutting-edge AI tools and other new capabilities to infiltrate live streams and chat rooms being groomed. And further measures will be announced in the Crime and Policing Bill to tackle those organising online sex abuse. Madam Deputy Speaker, nothing matters more than the safety of our children. Yet for too long, this horrific abuse was allowed to continue. Victims were ignored, perpetrators were left unpunished, and too many people looked the other way. And even when these shocking crimes were brought to light and national inquiries were commissioned to get to the truth, the resulting reports were too often left on the shelf as their recommendations gathered dust. So under this government, that has changed. We are taking action not just on those recommendations, but on the additional work we need to protect victims, put perpetrators behind bars, and to uncover the truth wherever things have gone wrong. This is about the protection of children, the protection of young girls, and the radical and ambitious mission we have set for this government to halve violence against women and girls in a decade. And I hope all ministers will support that mission and support the measures we have outlined today to help achieve it. I commend this statement to the House.
Not once has she mentioned going after the politicians involved in covering it up. Not once. And she admits that previous national inquiries haven't done X, Y, and Z. There has never been a national inquiry into the Pakistani rape gangs, which is what we want, which is what the nation wants, I think. And despite her claims, what she is proposing, both the local inquiries and this national desk review by Baroness Casey, it is not going to get anywhere near the truth of why it is that Conservative estimates are over 100,000 working class white girls were allowed to be systematically groomed and gang raped at an industrial scale across the country. Listen to the opposition guy and then I'll stop this and I'll talk.
I'll shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Let us start by remembering the victims of this scandal. Thousands of young girls, often in their early teens, were systematically raped by gangs of men, predominantly of Pakistani heritage. Those in positions of authority, the police, local councils, the CPS, ignored them, and in some cases even covered up these horrendous crimes because of absurd concerns about so-called cultural sensitivity. 10 days ago, the Prime Minister compounded this by saying it was a far-right bandwagon to raise these issues and call for a proper inquiry. Let me say this, it is not far-right to stand up for rape victims, and smearing those who raise this issue is exactly what led to the victims.
Order. The Shadow Home
They
Secretary
don't let him
will be
speak.
heard.
The Labour Party MPs
Smearing
don't let him
those who
speak.
raise this is exactly what led to the victims being ignored and the crimes covered up in the first place. So will the Home Secretary apologise on behalf of the Prime Minister for his language last week? Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is not true to say that the previous government did nothing following the ICSA report. The last government set up the Grooming Gang Task Force following the ICSA report, which led to 550 arrests of perpetrators in the first year alone, and I'm glad the new government is continuing that work. In April 2023, the data collection on the ethnicity of perpetrators was initiated, but But the initial publication of that, I think last November, showed the collection is incomplete. So will the Home Secretary ensure the police follow through on the work initiated in April 2023 and ensure the data is collected more comprehensively? And the mandatory reporting recommendation was introduced as an amendment to the Criminal Justice Bill, which failed due to the early election. And I'm glad the government say they will now pick that up and take it forwards. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, previous reports and reviews did not go far enough. The ICSA report itself was mainly not about these rape gangs. In fact, it barely touched on the issue and only looked at 6 towns. We now believe as many as 50 towns could have been affected, so ICSA barely scratched the surface. Now, the Home Secretary just announced government support for only 5 local inquiries. Let me say this is wholly inadequate when we know up to 50 towns are affected. So I have some serious questions for the Home Secretary. Firstly, how are the other 40+ towns supposed to get answers to the questions that they have? And these initial 5 towns, how will they be chosen? And secondly, the Home Secretary said nothing in her statement about the powers these local inquiries will have. It seems they will not be statutory inquiries under the 2005 Act. That means these local inquiries will not have the power to compel witnesses to attend or to take evidence under oath or to requisition written evidence. So if that's the case, how can they possibly get to the truth when faced with cover-ups? In fact, it was precisely that problem, the lack of powers, that led the chairs of the Manchester local inquiry to reportedly resign last year, because they weren't given the information they needed by public authorities and they didn't have the powers required to force its release, and so they resigned. These powers are needed, the legal powers, because these crimes were deliberately covered up in some cases. We heard just a week or two ago from the former Labour MP for Rochdale, Simon Danchuk, who said that the then chair of the Parliamentary Labour Party told him not to raise these issues for fear of losing Muslim votes. Truly appalling. Now, not a single person has been convicted for covering up or ignoring these crimes. In my view, the criminal offence of misconduct in public office might apply. And moreover, those vile perpetrators who can be deported should be, every single one of them, changing the law if needed to do it, and using visa sanctions with countries like Pakistan to ensure they accept back eligible perpetrators. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, what the Home Secretary has announced today is totally inadequate. It will only cover a fraction of the towns affected, and it appears these inquiries will not have the legal powers they need. That is why we need a proper, full, national public inquiry covering the whole country and with the powers under the Inquiry Act needed to obtain the evidence required. And it's not just me that thinks that. In the last week or two, the Labour MPs for Rotherham and Liverpool-Walton have called for a full national inquiry, as has Andy Burnham, the Labour Mayor of Greater Manchester. And I commend those members and Andy Burnham for their courage in speaking out. Recent polling shows the vast majority of the public want a full national public inquiry, including 73% of Labour voters. But most importantly and finally, so do victims. Jane was groomed and abused at the age of just 12. She was gang raped repeatedly. She told the police and she told her social worker. At one point, the police even found her being abused by an illegal immigrant. But instead of arresting him, the police arrested her. Jane still doesn't know if any of her abusers have been jailed or if any of the public officials who let her down so badly have been held to account. Jane now wants a proper national public inquiry. Home Secretary, why don't you?
Chris Phillip, the Shadow Home Secretary. The Labour government isn't for listening. It is for continuing to facilitate a cover-up. And the first of the towns where they want to continue to facilitate the cover-up is Oldham. The reason why, one of the many reasons why, is because they need to protect the town's MPs, all three of them who were complicit in the cover-up. Prove it. I think the evidence, you've seen the evidence, I've shared the evidence, and also the role of the Greater Manchester Mayor, Andy Burnham. Chris Phillip also made specific reference to the Muslim communities and protecting Muslim votes. That is now not Raja MIAH being mad or mental. This is what the Shadow Home Secretary has stood up and stated in Parliament. The government have backed themselves into a corner. This is the reaction, this is the response, and they will continue through with this. Now there are options. Of course, Reform, Nigel Farage and his team have said they'll launch their own inquiry with the greatest respect, and I support their intention. It won't get anywhere because it doesn't have statutory powers. And raising $1 million or 10 million or 20 million is not going to get anywhere. So you've asked me what should happen, and I'll share with you what now should happen. Remember, I am a campaigner. First and foremost, I am a campaigner that holds corrupt governments to account. In the context of the last 6 years, local government. Now, with your help, we will hold to account our corrupt and criminal national government, the government. To all extents and purposes, the people of this country are now at war with our government. It has been confirmed that there has been systematic industrial scale grooming and gang rape of our children across the country. It has been confirmed that Pakistani heritage rape gangs are at the centre of this. And it has been confirmed that the government refused to intervene or failed to intervene because not a fear of community relations, not a fear of the far right, but now the truth, fear of losing the bloc vote, the Muslim bloc vote. So you want to fight back against this. Well, these are the two immediate things that need to happen. First and foremost, Oldham needs to reject the inquiry. It needs to boycott the inquiry. Survivors need to issue statements, those who are public, to say we will not cooperate with this inquiry. It is a continuation of the cover-up. I will issue a statement confirming I will not engage with this inquiry because it is a continuation of the cover-up. So in every place the government goes, as its 5 case studies, every one of those places need to boycott the inquiry. We're not getting involved, we're not going to do anything. Why would you? Let them try and groom whoever it is they can groom to get involved. But we boycott the inquiries. And from the outside, I will rip them to shreds. And through the power of social media, YouTube, the X platform, I will share my content, and I urge you all to engage in it and to spread the word. Because that's how we got this far. Secondly, I now call on every one of the towns and cities across this country where politicians, local elected representatives, feel that there is a grooming gang issue, a Pakistani rape gang issue, to use the constitution in the local councils to call an immediate extraordinary council meeting. Every council's constitution allows councillors to have that power. Normally you need 4 or 5 signatures. And you call an extraordinary council meeting. And at that council meeting, you put forward a motion. And I'll write the motion and I'll share it online tomorrow. And it's an identical motion. And that's to instruct the chief executive of the council to write to the government, appalled at their ongoing refusal to honestly investigate the cover-up of the grooming and gang rape of the nation's children, and demand that the Home Secretary change her mind and launch a national inquiry. When the conflict in Gaza took place, the Muslims mobilised across the country, and council after council after council wrote off to the government wanting some form of intervention in Israel or to condemn Israel. Now, we must use the very tactics they used. We must use those very tactics for our own children and for the safety of our own nation. Every town council, every council across the country where politicians care about this, all they have to do is contact the council chief executive and call for an extraordinary council meeting with a specifically worded motion. And within 2 weeks, within 3 weeks, because the extraordinary council meetings have got to happen within 10 days. So within 2 weeks, 50 councils, 100 councils can and should simultaneously write to the government. And that will collapse. That, alongside the towns refusing to engage in this nonsense, will collapse the Home Office's attempt, Yvette Cooper's attempt, to cover up and protect her politician friends. This is how we do it. This is not about being frightened of the Pakistani community. This is about taking control of the situation. This is about using the democratic systems available to us to achieve the aim that we want. And the aim that we want is a public inquiry into the Pakistani rape gangs. And we do that with those 2 simple, straightforward actions. The 5 towns, the survivors refuse to engage, partners involved refuse to engage, and boycott. And secondly, the Conservative councillors, the independent councillors, whoever you are across this country, call an extraordinary council meeting in your local authorities, in your councils, and put forward a motion. Put forward a motion calling the Home Secretary out for the complicity in continuing to cover up for the Pakistani rape gangs, and demanding that the government launch a national inquiry. That is how you win. That is how we defeat them. I told you at the beginning, and I've repeatedly told you, I'm not here as a survivor. I'm not here to race bait. I'm here to force justice, and I'm here because I am a campaigner. This is why they have failed to stop us in Oldham, and this is why they will fail to stop us across the country. Every local authority who cares about this, every councillor in every local authority who cares about this, now have a duty. And should they fail to work with us, then you need to know this. They had an opportunity to help be part of the solution. You don't have to keep going begging to the government and hoping that they'll do the right thing, because it's very clear this government will not do the right thing. This government is at war with its people. And we have to fight back. And that's not by marching on the streets, because they know how to contain that. We got it this far not by marching on the streets. We got it this far by political manoeuvring. And yes, it's took us 6 years. So what? Look where we are. Well, within the next 2 weeks, we can force this government to change their mind. Hopefully, you found this transmission of value. Hopefully, those of you who haven't yet will subscribe to my YouTube channel at the very least. It's free. And if you can, the 1,000 of you who watched this evening so far, if each of you bought me a coffee, I'd be okay for 2 months. Please, if you find value in my work, support me. And please, go and have a look at Andy Gould's Heretics podcast. It's on YouTube, it's on X. The man bravely reached out to me. I went to see him and he's put it out there. And you will see how deep this scandal goes. I will be back on Sunday with a bit of luck. I'll continue to post on X, which is where I'm posting most of my updates. I'll put out the motion on X tomorrow and call on all opposition councillors or all councils across the country to convene an extraordinary council meeting and pass a motion where they write to the government demanding a public inquiry. Mark, the way to get hold of me is to email me. That's or text me or message me. I'm easily found on X or any of those platforms. My name is Raja MIAH. I've led a 6-year campaign that has helped get us to where we now are. And the message we have now is the message we had when we first started. Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them.
Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them. On the 20th of November 2003, James Ignatius O'Rourke McMahon was elected councillor for the Failsworth East Ward of Oldham. Deeply ambitious, he ruthlessly rose to power, and by 2011, he was already leader of the council. In 2015, exploiting a Labour Party loophole, he became MP for Oldham West and Royton. If only the people of the town knew then what they now know. Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them.